My name is Samira Salafu, and it is my privilege to welcome you to the 2018 University of Alberta Last Lecture on behalf of our Alumni Association. As a current student, I've been a volunteer with the Alumni Association for the last 2 years as a member of the Alumni Student Council. Throughout my experience, I've had the chance to interact with prospective students, current students, and alumni, creating a network of diverse individuals from our University of Alberta. My involvement also gave me the opportunity to travel across Western Canada, fund and attend innovative events, and gave me the opportunity to be here, speaking to you. As I'm looking into the audience, it's really cool to see a mixture of current students and alumni, and I'd like to personally give a shout out to my fellow students who are attending a lecture that they are unfortunately not getting credits for during this last week of classes. Thank you so much for being here. It is a known fact that our students and alumni do great things that are in part inspired by their professors. In fact, we surveyed alumni and asked them, what was the most impactful part of their time on campus? And by a wide margin, they said, experience with faculty. The annual event known as the Last Lecture grew out of that. The Alumni Association wanted to celebrate those professors who inspire their students, who challenge them, who give them the skills, the confidence, and the courage to succeed. This year, over 100 of professors were nominated and recognized as having embodied those qualities, but one professor came out on top. To introduce our speaker, I'd like to invite Jessie Perrin to the stage, one of the students who nominated this year's Last Lecture.
Hey everyone, my name is Jessie Perrin, and I'm one of the students who nominated Dr. Michele Moscicki to be this year's last lecturer. Before she starts the lecture, I'd like to introduce you to her work. Dr. Michele Moscicki has been a sessional instructor at the University of Alberta's Department of Psychology since 2012. Dr. Moscicki completed her undergraduate studies at the University of Windsor in her hometown of Windsor, Ontario, in 2006. There she earned her bachelor's degree and completed her honors work in an aquatic ecology lab. Dr. Moscicki completed her master's degree in 2009 and her PhD in 2014 in psychology at the University of Alberta. Her research interests lie in understanding influences of developmental stressors on behavior, cognition, neural development, and the formation of different stress coping styles. Since becoming a university instructor, she has also developed an interest in pedagogical research related to student motivation, learning strategies, skills-based outcomes, and effective teaching techniques used to increase those measures. I nominated Dr. Moscicki because I could always look forward to her lectures. Dr. Moscicki is one of the most enthusiastic and energetic professors I've ever had. Her use of real-world examples makes materials interesting, relevant, and easy to understand. I found Dr. Moscicki to be very personable. Her feedback was always helpful and reflected a genuine interest in student success. Through conversations with my peers, I know that this impression is shared by many, and I hope that you enjoy Dr. Moscicki's last lecture of 2018 as much as we have enjoyed her classes. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michele Moscicki as the last lecturer of 2018.
Thanks, Jessie. Hello. Thank you very much for the introduction, Jessie. Thank you for the time you took to nominate me to give this last lecture today, as well as the time you took to actually come here and give that awesome introduction for me. So, before I go any further, I would just like to say that I am very honored and humbled to have been nominated as your last lecturer today. Honestly, I was fairly blown away by the whole thing. This entire experience has been very surreal. I was just back there in a dressing room that was just for me, that had all of these lights around it that were just for me, had my own private bathroom. The whole thing is very odd. But I would like to deeply, deeply thank all of the students that nominated me for this last lecture today. The outpouring of love and support that I've received from everyone has been overwhelming, And I would also like to thank all of you guys for coming here today so that I have somebody to talk to. And I would like to thank all the people on the internet who might watch this video. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this talk, and thank you guys for taking time out of your Wednesday night. When you know, maybe you had other things to do. I know Survivor's on tonight, but there is some free food after, so. Okay, so as you can see by the title of my slide here, my talk today is gonna be about stress. And if you've ever been a student in my class or have really talked to me for more than 5 minutes, this should be no surprise to you that I'm going to talk about stress. It is one of my favorite topics to talk about, which is a little bit weird because normally we only talk about stress to sort of complain about how much of it we have. But I really enjoy talking about this topic, so I'm very happy to share this stuff with you guys today. Also, as you may have heard, a couple of years ago started a class here at the U of A called the Biology of Stress and Coping. And it really kind of started that class as a way to learn more about coping for myself. And it has sort of ballooned into something that I couldn't have really imagined. But I'm hoping to share some of the stuff that I've learned today with you guys. And the feedback that I hear from my students about this class is that they leave the class having a totally different perspective on their own stress response. And I get emails from students a year or two after they've taken the class with me, and they'll say things like, I use the techniques we talked about in class, I've been incorporating them into my life, I don't have nearly the amount of stress that I had before, or the stress that I have I'm much better at dealing with. And I can't imagine anything more fulfilling to hear as a teacher is that I have had an impact on a student's life that goes far beyond our time together in the classroom. So my hope today is that some of you will also take something away from this talk tonight that you can incorporate into your own lives to lead more fulfilling, well-rounded, balanced lives. And if that is the case, then I will feel like I have lived up to this very humbling title of last lecturer. Okay, so before I really get into the meat and potatoes of what I want to talk about today, I just want to sort of tell you a little bit about how I found out that I was nominated to be the last lecturer. So I actually found out in the middle of a job interview. So if none of you have ever been on an academic job interview, I'll just break it down a little bit for you. This interview started at 9 a.m., and then it ended at 9 p.m. So this is a long, intense day. When I found out that I was nominated to give this talk, it was about 2:30 on that day, so I'd already been through a stressful 90-minute panel interview where 5 people were asking me questions for an hour and a half. I had a lot of flashbacks to oral exams from my grad school days. I spent an hour with students at lunch. They were grilling me with questions. And I finally had a little bit of downtime to go over a job talk that I was giving at 3 o'clock to a panel of students and professors and the hiring committee. And it was going to be videotaped, very similar to this. So I'd already spent a fairly stressful day, and I was preparing for a more stressful day. So I took a little break to check my email. And I saw this email titled, Last Lecture. And I said, oh, that's cool. This is probably them telling me who's giving the last lecture this year. And then I opened this email, and I was like, apparently, I was nominated to give the last lecture this year. That is not what I thought that email was going to say. So I was already kind of shocked, and I scrolled down a little bit more in this email, and I at least already knew what the last lecture was. So, so I did at least already know what the last lecture was, because my brother, hi Mark, had given me Randy Pausch's book, Last Lecture, when I defended my master's defense. So I was aware that this was a talk where Dr. Pausch was able to sort of share some kernels of wisdom that he learned throughout his life. So I thought, okay, well, at least I know a little bit about what this talk is supposed to be. So I sort of scrolled more in this email, and then I came to the last lecture prompt, which is really the only thing they tell you in terms of what to talk about for this last lecture. And you could see it here. If this was your last chance to address a large audience, what would you say? And I was sort of like, exactly, what would I say? So I thought about it for a little bit, but then it became really clear. It was like, okay, I'm gonna take the old piece of novelist advice. They always say, write what you know, right? So I'm gonna speak what I know. I know about myself, and I know a little bit about stress. So today you guys are gonna hear a little bit about my life, a little bit about how I deal with stress, some stress coping strategies that then maybe you can incorporate into your own lives to hopefully take something away from this talk that you guys can carry with you for the rest of your lives. Right? If everybody leaves this talk thinking just a little bit differently about their stress response, I will think that this has been a valuable way for us to spend our time here. Okay. The other little snippet that I saw in that email was that this is a chance for the instructor to go off syllabus. And I thought, excellent. This is right in my wheelhouse. I go off syllabus all the time. I'm off script right now. So I thought, okay, like this I can do. I love learning about all kinds of stuff. I've always loved learning. I was in school for 27 years, so you'd hope I love learning. So I always love learning, and I always love to tell my students about the interesting things I've been learning. So I voraciously read about all kinds of stuff. So every so often I'll come into class and I'll just be so excited to share what I've learned with my students, and often that's not related to the syllabus. So earlier, well, actually last month, I had a focus group done in one of my classes because I'm always interested in improving as an instructor. And the result of that focus group was that the students gave me some really useful feedback, is that they really love the tangents, they find them interesting and useful, but what they don't really love is that they never knew if that material was going to be testable or not. So I said, okay, like I get it, students are still in this spot where they want to learn, but they're also afraid about being evaluated on that learning. So sometimes that fear makes it a little difficult for them to sort of take everything in if they're worried about how they're going to be tested. So this was really valuable feedback for me. So this leads into my first sort of life lesson that I came up with for this talk. And that is that we are all teachers and we are all learners. I learned from my students that day how to better help them learn. So they were teaching me. And like I said, I view myself as a teacher right now. The word doctor actually comes from a Latin word that means teacher. And I also love to learn. So I'm teacher and I am learner. And I always try to convey that idea to my students, is that I'm there to help them learn, but they also teach me so much too. So they're being teachers and helping me learn as well. So this is sort of the idea that I hope we never, however far you get away from being in a school setting, is that you never really lose that love of learning and sharing that learning with others. So we are all teachers and we are all students. So I have these other couple pictures up here to highlight that some young people are really great at morphing from the role of student into the role of teacher. So this picture up here is from the Edmonton Regional Science Fair. I do a lot of volunteering with them. Our fair was actually just last weekend. And it's always so inspiring to see these students go from the role of student to the role of teacher, where they then start explaining these projects they've been working on for months to the judges who come and listen to them. And it's so inspiring to see them get so excited to share that knowledge with somebody else that it just makes you feel inspired as a teacher to go share your knowledge with other people too. So I love to see young people morphing from the role of student into the role of teacher. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention here that my own research student, Emily, she is the one who pointed out the design ideas feature in PowerPoint to me. So without her, these slides wouldn't be nearly as nice as they are now, because I'm not great at graphic design. So I'd like to give a shout out to Emily. Thank you very much. Emily, this shout out will now live on the internet forever. You're welcome. So now I'm going to share a little secret with you guys. Although I view myself as a teacher now, I never thought I would be a teacher. I even said to my mom in high school, I will never be a teacher. I am terrible at this, never, ever, ever. I used to try to tutor people in high school, friends of mine. They would pay me in things like Wendy's Frosties. I'm still very motivated to work for free food, hence being here today. Grad school habits die hard, guys. So I never thought I'd be a teacher. I get paid in Frosties, but what happened was that the way that I understood things in my head, there always seemed to be some disconnect between being able to convey what I understood to somebody else. There was just sort of like nothing transmitted. And I never blamed the person I was trying to tutor. I just figured, okay, I must be really bad at explaining things. That's on me. This is just a skill that I stink at. And that was fine by me, because I never planned to go into teaching. I planned to maybe go into research. I thought being a scientist would be cool. I never thought teaching would be a part of it. Then fast forward to here we are now. Somehow I ended up being a teacher to between 200 to 700 students this semester. So it's sometimes crazy how things work out like that. And I really got into teaching at first because I was getting to the end of my PhD and my funding was about to run out, and I still wanted to do things like buy food and pay rent. So I ended up taking on my first class in summer 2012. So I've been teaching for almost 6 years now. And the second thing I'd like to share with you guys is that teaching made me really, really nervous. So I would get very stressed about teaching. So as I was prepping that first class, I would sometimes just sit in my apartment and look out my window, kind of overcome with anxiety and think like, what have I done? There's no way I'm gonna be able to do this. I have no idea what I'm doing. So I would get really, really stressed about this idea. And then as I went to actually go teach my first class, I would also get really, really nervous that students were gonna ask me something that I didn't know. And guess what? They did. They asked me things, I didn't know the answers. But nobody died. I didn't even get fired. I ended up as your last lecturer for 2018. So it couldn't have been that bad, right? So this is when I started to realize that it's okay to not know everything. I thought I had to go in knowing everything, but that totally goes against the idea that we are lifelong learners. If I already know everything, I have nothing left to learn. But that's not really my philosophy at all, is that we always have something new to learn. And now I actually really love when my students ask me questions that I don't know the answer to, because then I always keep a little pad of paper and a pen on my lectern in class, and whenever a student asks me a question that I don't know the answer to, I'll usually say, that's a really cool idea. I've never looked into it before. I'll scribble it down on my little pad, and I'll go learn about it later. But then the times I love the most are when the student who asked me the question actually goes and seeks out the answer on their own, and then they email me and they tell me what they found out because they think I might be interested. I love when this happens. That is a classic example of student becoming teacher and teacher becoming student. So this is sort of my first thing that I've learned in my brief time on this planet, is that we are all teachers and we are all learners. And it is okay if you don't know everything. Okay, so I hope we never lose sight of that idea that we always want to learn and we always want to share that learning with others. Okay? So now I'd like to just back up a little bit and take you on a bit of a tour of the reactions I had when I found out that I was nominated as the last lecturer. So, of course, I read this email, figured out it was saying that I was going to give this talk, so I wanted to know a little bit more about what this talk was all about. So I went to the last lecturer webpage. And this is what their criteria say for nominating the last lecturer. They say, we're looking for the quirkiest, most inspiring, immensely memorable lecturers on campus. Your chance to show those outstanding U Alberta instructors some love. So now I was sort of like, whew, okay, so students must think I'm like maybe inspiring, memorable, outstanding, like quirky. Okay, I can get that. But these other things, it was like, wow, this is a lot. So that led to my first reaction, which was shock and disbelief. Why had the students nominated me for this? Did they really see these things in me that at this point I didn't even necessarily see in myself? So I was very shocked to find that I had been nominated to give this talk today. And then I did a little bit more creeping on the last lecturer website, and I looked at the previous last lecturers that have given this talk, and I found that I believe this is the 5th last lecture talk that's happened here, and all 4 previous last lecturers were gentlemen, so I'm very honored to be the first woman giving this talk, so thank you again to the students. Thank you guys, too. And also, all of those previous last lecturers had, as far as we have verified, had been full professors. So this means that they've been in their careers for way longer than I'd been in mine. I just started teaching a little over 5 years ago. So I thought, those people, sure, they probably have some valuable wisdom to pass on to people that are, you know, as you said, not getting credit for coming here tonight. But I thought, what do I have to say that anyone would find value in that came to spend their Wednesday night with me? So once I figured out that, yes, I was giving this talk, what this talk was all about, then my next job became, okay, well, my students must have nominated me because they think that I give engaging classes. That's what a lot of students tell me. This is what the feedback from the last lecturer nomination was. So then I started to reflect on how can I make this talk engaging? And the first thing that kind of came to mind was that I could do what happened before once when I was giving an announcement to a bunch of science fair people, hundreds of people like are here right now. For the whole 5 minutes I was up there giving that announcement, I apparently had the word "but" written all over my face. I did not know this at the time. The audience knew it, They laughed, like you guys. I did not know why they were laughing at my announcement, because it was logistics. It wasn't really funny. So I'm pretty sure they didn't listen to anything I had to say, but they were pretty engaged. So I was like, I could do that, but I actually want you guys to kind of listen to some of the things that I have to say. So I'm gonna have to find a way to be engaging without having like a butt on my face this whole time. So I thought, okay, let's think about what do my students tell me they like about my classes, and then what do I like about talks that I find engaging? So I kind of distilled these things down into 3 sort of points that, to me, make a talk really engaging, or the talks that I really like to listen to really incorporate these points. Now, every time I do this, I'm gonna get scared. There we go. Number 1 is passion. If you talk about something you are passionate about, people can feel that. It is infectious. And this stress fits the bill for this for me. I'm very passionate about talking about it, very passionate about sharing what I know about stress with other people to hopefully help other people deal better with their stress. So I knew that I have to talk about something I was passionate about. I mean, this is the signature that I have in my email, so everybody that emails me sees this at the bottom, so clearly I knew that I had to talk about something I was passionate about. Then the second thing that I always think makes a talk really engaging is the idea of sort of self-disclosure or storytelling. I always really have a lot of respect for speakers that sort of talk about their own perceived shortcomings or things that they've overcome or things that they've learned to manage. And then they share that with an audience. It takes a lot of bravery to sort of do that kind of self-disclosure. So I knew that I'd be infusing this talk with some stories about my own life. You guys already heard about how teaching really stressed me out. You're gonna hear about a few more things that stressed me out before the end of this talk. So hence the title of my talk, Lessons from Life in Progress, Overcoming Stress and Getting Out of My Own Way. And then the last thing that I consider that really sort of makes a talk engaging to me is the idea of applying those things to real life. My students always love when the things that we talk about in class have direct applications to their real life. Like Jesse said, they love those real life examples. They love seeing how what we're talking about can be incorporated into their life right now to actually move them to being even more fulfilled and even more satisfied with their lives. Whoop, okay. So we're going to talk about some real life stories today. Okay, how does this stuff apply to me? So before we get into that, now we're kind of getting to the meat and potatoes here. I would just like to do one thing that I always like to incorporate into my classes, a little bit of audience participation. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 like this. And when I do this, I would just like you guys, if you have experienced any stress in the last week or two, when I do this, to just say yes. And I would like your yes to kind of reflect the amount of stress you've experienced. So, if you experience a little stress, give me a little yes. If you experience a lot of stress, give me a big yes. Everybody ready? 1, 2, 3. Yes! Okay. All right, people on the internet, I almost got blown off the stage with that yes. So clearly, we know what stress is all about, right? Like, we experience this all the time. So I did a little digging to see what types of things tend to stress people out. So I looked at a couple sources, because this might be a mixed audience. So I looked at the American Psychological Association. They run a study every year called the Stress in America Survey to look at what's stressing people out. So you have a nice list of things that probably everybody here can relate to. And then I also looked at teens and young adults. So they tend to have very similar stressors to adults, very much things related to relationships and navigating those types of things. So clearly, we stress about a lot of stuff, right? This is only the stuff that made the top of the list. There are a bunch more. So we stress a lot. So I would like to give you a little bit of an introduction to your stress response so we all understand what this response is and why it's being activated all the time. So first I'm going to talk about our acute stress response. This is your stress response to things that are short-lived but emergency situations, okay? This is what the stress response has evolved to help us deal with. The stress response is so important that all kinds of animals have a very similar system that they activate when they're stressed. It's so important because it's crucial for our survival. If your ancestors didn't have a stress response, they wouldn't have been able to run away from all those predators, and they would not have made you guys. So really, if you think about it, we're all here because of the stress response. Mind-blowing, right? So it's not really the enemy. It's actually our friend. Our stress response is trying to help us out when we encounter some sort of emergency or threat. That's what it's all about. Our stress response is trying to give us all the energy that it can muster so we can get out of that emergency situation. This is the whole idea of fight or flight, is mobilizing energy to your body so you can either fight your way out of an emergency or you can run away. Both of those things require a lot of energy going to your muscles. And then they require a way to get that energy to your muscles really fast. So this is why we experience those symptoms of stress. Things like the racing heartbeat, the increased breathing rate. All those things are happening to get glucose to your muscles to help you get away from a legitimate emergency situation. These things are positive and adaptive when we activate the system the way that it was designed to be activated when we're dealing with short-term emergency situations. This is what the whole thing evolved for. The problem that we often run into now, so the problem is that if we activate the system when we're not supposed to, it does a lot of things that are inefficient at the time, but they're useful for an emergency. But if we're doing those inefficient things all of the time, that's when we start to get things like stress-related disease. Okay? So, here we go. So these are some of the inefficient things your stress response will do. Because it's all about getting you out of this emergency right now, it shuts down any sort of long-term optimistic building processes. It doesn't want to give you energy for digestion. That giant Big Mac you just ate, you don't have enough time to digest it to get energy to your muscles, so we're not going to worry about that right now. Growth and tissue repair. No point in doing that until you know if you survived this emergency. Reproduction, no point in thinking about babies unless you know if you're going to survive the next 10 minutes. Immunity, we've probably all experienced this. You go through some really stressful period, and then right after it's over, you get sick, and then you get sick for a while. So our immune system often becomes inhibited during stress too. So this stuff is all positive and adaptive if we're activating the stress response system, which comes from our sympathetic nervous system, when we're actually in an emergency. This is going to help us stay alive. But when we're not in an emergency, we want to activate our other side of the nervous system, our parasympathetic. This is our rest and digest and repair system. If we don't activate this, our body never has a chance to repair all of the damage that was done trying to get us out of this emergency. So the great thing about these two nervous systems is that they're complementary. Basically, what one thing does, the other system does the opposite. So these systems can't be activated at the same time. So this is great because a lot of coping strategies revolve around activating that parasympathetic system, your rest and digest system. Because if you do that, that will automatically shut down your fight or flight system. So once we get into the coping strategies, you'll see how they're all about activating this parasympathetic system. Okay, with chronic stress, if you activate the stress response many more times than you need to, if you're living every day as though it's a survival emergency, that is not what that stress response evolved to be able to help you with. That's when we get things like memory impairment, heart disease, diabetes, fatigue, depression. All these things can be related to chronic stress. So what we really want is to get to this area of eustress. We want to activate our stress response when we need it, get us that energy to deal with a challenge, but then when that challenge is over, we want that stress response to go back down and shut off. We don't want to live every day as though it's a survival emergency. Okay? So we can really kind of boil stress down to this equation, if you will. Stress is really the demands placed on us we feel are larger than the coping resources that we have. So, you can imagine something like if you need 30 cupcakes for something tomorrow, and you have all the supplies at home you need, and you have all day to do it, great. Your coping resources, time and supplies, far outweigh the demand of making 30 cupcakes. It might even be fun and relaxing to do it. But if you remember at 11:30 p.m. that you need 30 cupcakes tomorrow and you have no supplies and you have a bunch of things you still have to do, and now you have to run to the grocery store before it closes, get all these supplies, make these 30 cupcakes as well as all the other stuff you have to do, now your coping resources aren't quite outweighing the demand that's been placed on you. This is when we start to get stressed. Okay? So, now that we've kind of done a little bit of an intro to the stress response and what it's for, help us survive these emergency situations, I'm going to go through the rest of the reactions I had in terms of finding out that I was the last lecturer for today. So we already know about the first two, shock, disbelief, and doubt. And then you can probably gather from this talk that stress is going to play a part here. So that was my third reaction. I learned that this talk was at the Tims, and I was like, the Tims? That is fancy. This is no run-of-the-mill classroom talk here that I'm giving in one of my regular classes. Like I said, I had the dressing room and the private bathroom. This is a fancy place. I'm not really a fancy person. So then I started to think, I don't know if I can do this. And as soon as you think that something is a threat to you and you don't know if you have the resources to cope with it, that's when you start to activate this ancient stress response system that evolved to help you deal with emergency threats. So my stress response started to activate. And this is when you can get caught in one of those vicious cycles of stress. Stress is all about vicious cycles. So once your stress response starts to activate, your mind is so used to interpreting those signals, the racing heartbeat, the increased breathing rate, the sweating. You're so used to interpreting that as something threatening is happening, that when those things happen to your body, your mind will say, this must mean that there's a threat around. So you get in this cycle where the mind perceives that, I don't know if I can handle this situation. This is a threat. Your body says, threat? I know what to do about that. I will mobilize you some energy. Your mind says, my body mobilized some energy. That must mean this threat is real and that is dangerous. That's what happens when there's a real dangerous threat. So then you register real dangerous threat. Then your body says, ooh, real dangerous threat. I'm gonna mobilize you even more energy. And then your mind says, more energy, this thing must be really bad. And then you kind of go into this cycle until sort of you reach the point of panic, right? So this was my next reaction, panic. There is no way that I can do this. So once you think that something is so threatening that you are not able to mobilize enough coping resources to deal with it, this is where you really start to panic. So part of my panic involved kind of activating that fight or flight response, and mostly the flight part. So I started to think, I don't know if I can do this. Maybe I'll just say that I'm busy that night, or like I'm out of town or something, and then I'm not able to do this last lecture. That will allow me to totally avoid this stressor, and I can just run away from it. That's what my stress response is for, right? Like helping me run away. But I gotta tell you guys, when I told my husband that I was nominated to give the last lecture here, he was so excited for me. He was like, you totally deserve this, you're gonna do great. He knew that I had the coping resources to deal with this. He knew that I had something useful to say and kind of an engaging way to say it. But I didn't believe that at the time. So, and like, when I say excited, I mean really excited. Like, he ran around the living room excited. and I mean like literally. And not the way literally is normally used now, like literally actually ran around the living room. So he was super excited. Okay. So he recognized that I'd be able to do this. And then when I told him that I was thinking maybe I wouldn't do it, the look on his face said everything. He was just so disappointed, but not disappointed in me, disappointed that maybe I wouldn't get to experience this awesome opportunity because I'd let my stress get the best of me. He knew that I could do this. He knew I had the coping resources. And ultimately, he said he'd support me in whatever I decided to do. And so then I started to realize that even if I get up here and totally blow the whole thing and everything stinks, he's still gonna be there supporting me. So I started to think, I actually have more coping resources for this potential threat than I thought. And as soon as I started to think that I had more coping resources than I thought, I started reaction number 5. Whoops. My reaction turned from panic to hope. And I thought, all right, I've done scary things in the past. I was really scared about teaching, and I did that, and that turned out pretty good. Ironically, so well that I was then nominated for this talk. So I started to think, maybe I can do this. And that concrete evidence, and knowing that I had coping resources available to me, led me to that final reaction of confidence. Maybe I can do this talk today. Maybe I can do it well. Maybe I have something useful to say. Maybe I could actually rock this talk. Now, all of a sudden, it seemed like my coping resources were outweighing the demand that was placed on me. And as soon as you start to think that calms down your stress response. This thing is no longer a threat. It's no longer an emergency. You're able to deal with this thing. You got this. You don't have to activate this ancient system that is trying to help you. You don't need the help. You are good to go. So I share the story of my reactions to illustrate kind of my second life lesson for this talk. And that is the idea that people that seem confident also experience a lot of stress. So all my students often tell me things like, oh, you get up there and you seem so confident talking to people, like I can never do what you do. And I used to think this all the time about people who gave talks too. the previous last lectures, when I creeped on their talks, I was like, these people look really confident doing this. I don't know if I had that kind of confidence. Or when I watched TED Talks online, those people seem so polished and so talented that they must have all the confidence in the world and never get stressed. But let me tell you, those people, I can guarantee you, are activating their stress response. Even if they seem totally polished and totally talented and totally great at what they're doing, they're still activating this response because that response is there to mobilize energy for you. But what a lot of these people are doing is looking at their stress response in a different way. They're not looking at this mobilization of energy as a threat, they're looking at it as excitement. Because if you think about it, those reactions are the same. When you get excited, heart starts to pound, breathing rate increases, might even start to sweat a little bit, but you interpret that as a positive thing. So really, perception is so important. Perception is reality, even to our body. The way that you perceive your stress response is really important for how that stress response is activated. Ironically, there is an awesome TED Talk that I show about this idea in my class, and it talks about how when you view your stress response in this positive way, and you view it as helping you to rise to this challenge, giving you the energy you need to give an engaging lecture, or to do that run, or to do whatever challenging thing you're facing, then your stress response actually changes. Your blood vessels actually stay more elastic and relaxed. They don't tighten up and raise your blood pressure like they do when you perceive those things as a threat. So perception of your stress response has a huge impact in how that stress response actually affects your body. So perception to your body is reality. And then this kind of ties into another part of this lesson, is the idea that perception that other people have of you is also kind of their reality of you. So when we think these people are confident, like my students say to me, that's their perception of me, so that's their reality of me. But that's sometimes not my own reality of me. So that can also lead us to feel more stressed. If we think that these other people have it all together and know what they're doing and never get stressed, then we start to think, why don't I have it all together or know what I'm doing? Or why do I get stressed and these people don't? But often we're just seeing our perception of those people, and that might not be truly what those people think of themselves. And oftentimes those people might be thinking something similar about you. This person seems to have it all together, or is really talented, or is confident, even if you're not feeling that way about yourself. So perception is reality. So as you kind of saw, I have a little bit of a story to illustrate this idea. One of the students in my intro class last semester sent me an email, and at the end had this little paragraph to it. And she said, I remember at the beginning of the course talking about how someone's pupils dilate when they're nervous. This is true. And then she said, I always wondered if you noticed that about me when I talked to you after lectures. Now I feel like you definitely did. You are so cool, it is intimidating. You're so badass. And I just thought, whoa, this person's perception of me is not at all my perception of myself. I never thought of myself as cool. You can ask anybody in my high school. I did not think of myself as cool. Intimidating, I mean, I think I'm a big teddy bear, and like, I'm in a way too nice. And then badass, I just can't even wrap my head around that one. Like, none of this relates to how I perceive myself. But this was this person's perception of me, and that was then that person's reality of me. So I tell this to kind of highlight to everybody why my students are often so flabbergasted when I tell them that I used to hate public speaking. Crazy, right? Like, now my job is literally to get up in front of hundreds of people multiple times a week and talk to them. I hate public speaking, or I hated it so much that I remember in grade school, I once had to give a 5-minute speech, threw up all over my desk. And then in high school, so I equate performing with public speaking. In high school, I was in grade 9 and we were in gym class and we had choreographed a dance and we were gonna have to perform it in front of the rest of the gym class. Now mind you, there were only about 20 other people in this gym class. This is the one and only time I ever faked sick in high school. I know, I faked sick just to get out of having to do this performance. And now my parents are gonna watch this talk and I've never told them that story, so sorry mom, sorry dad. I think I turned out okay. So, clearly, I did not like performing. I would try to get out of it with my fight or flight response and try and avoid that stressor altogether. And now, well, if you had told me, say when I was 16, that I'd be doing what I'm doing now, like getting up here and talking in front of all you lovely people, I would have gave you sort of my patented I don't think so. You cannot be serious look. I started that look way back when I was a baby. This is still one of my favorite pictures of myself. Figured I had to work it in here somehow. So I would have been having none of public speaking. I would have been like, nope, this is not something that I can do. So this is just to highlight to everybody that if you might look at someone and have a perception of them that's totally different than the perception they have of themselves, to highlight that even if you aren't feeling that confident about something, that's totally normal. You can still get up there and rock it anyway. Just have to believe that your coping resources are able to overcome those demands. So it's very much like the idea of bravery. Bravery isn't really not being afraid. It's kind of being afraid but doing it anyway. So stress management isn't about not ever being stressed. It's about what you do with those feelings and how you manage them and how you don't let those feelings sort of rob you of the opportunity to do some really amazing things, like perhaps give the last lecture. So now that we've sort of gone through a little bit of my journey of how I got here, let's get into the meat and potatoes. So we know that stress demands more than coping resources. Oftentimes we can't really change a lot of the demands that are placed on us, but what we can do is increase our coping resources. So if we can increase those things enough, they can overcome that demand, and then we can diminish our stress response. So there is hope. We can learn how to cope. And when we have an arsenal of coping strategies at our disposal, that gives us more confidence that we can handle the demands that the world throws at us. And when we have that confidence and we don't perceive those things as a threat, we won't start activating that ancient stress response system. So now, what I imagine most of you came here to hear tonight, let's go through some coping strategies that hopefully you guys can incorporate into your own lives to move yourselves to even better, healthier stress coping. Okay? So first, I want to highlight the idea that stress impacts 4 different areas of our lives pretty strongly. And those areas are all interrelated. So stress will impact our thoughts. So maybe like me, you start to doubt that maybe you can do those things, or the demand is too much, or you don't think you have enough coping resources. Or maybe stress really impacts your behaviors. Maybe you engage in a lot of things like procrastination. Or maybe stress impacts your feelings. Maybe you start to get sad and overwhelmed. Or maybe stress impacts your physiology. Maybe you start to get really exhausted, run down, you start to get muscle aches, your immune system starts to not protect you from what it's supposed to. So I want everybody to just take a minute and think about which of these 4 areas stress tends to impact the most in you, and then the coping strategies that fall under that area are likely the ones that are going to show the most benefit for you, because all of those areas are then interrelated, so the coping strategies for one area are going to sort of trickle down and help you with all those other things as well. So let's talk about thoughts. This is the one that always gets me, as you guys have heard. So the thing about thoughts is that they're just thoughts. They only have the power that we give to them. They're not physical things. They can't come out and hurt us, but we give them all kinds of power when we start to believe them, even though a lot of the thoughts that we have are not true things. They just sort of are things that float through our minds that we think might happen or could happen or maybe will happen, but they're not actual true things. So some of these techniques are to help you try to rein in some of those thoughts. And here I just want to mention that the really great thing about us as humans is that we have these amazingly plastic brains. So when we are born, we basically can't do anything, right? We need another human to take care of us for years before we're finally able to do stuff for ourselves. Other animals aren't quite like this. Some animals, they're born, an hour later, they're running around. Human, it takes us like a year to figure this out. But that's because other animals, they have a lot more hardwired brains than we have. Our brains are very plastic, so we are very adaptable to our environments. This is great because this means that you can change your thoughts. Your brain is plastic, your thoughts come from your brain, change your mind, change your life. So let's talk about how you can change some of those thoughts. Okay, so we can probably all relate to this idea, right? I got 99 problems. 86 of them are completely made up scenarios in my head that I'm stressing about for absolutely no reason. So let's try to take you from that stress to being able to manage it. So the first thing I want to talk about for thoughts is normalizing your thoughts. This is the idea that if you have a stressful thought, that's okay. Everybody has stressful thoughts. I just shared a bunch of my own stressful thoughts with you guys. Just because you have a stressful thought doesn't mean that that thing is necessarily dangerous or that you have to believe that thought. or that you're somehow like weak or inadequate for having this thought in the first place. We all have stressful thoughts. It's totally normal. So taking away some of that stigma we sometimes put on ourselves can actually help decrease some of that feeling of threat, is knowing that these thoughts happen to everybody. So these things are natural. They're also not permanent. This is one that really helped work for me during my PhD. Often I'd have phone conversations with my parents when I was going through some like rough patch in my PhD, none of my experiments were working out, I had to do all kinds of revisions. And my dad would always say to me, Mish, this too shall pass. So these things are not permanent, this stressor won't be with you forever, it's just a challenge you're dealing with right now, but eventually this thing will pass. So as a thing, I literally have a wooden thing on my desk that says this too shall pass. So whenever I get stressed, I look at that thing, I realize this thing isn't permanent. And then refute your thinking. So this is kind of what I was doing when I was going through my range of reactions. We want to try to find concrete evidence for those thoughts. Remember, thoughts are just things that pass through our minds. So let's try to see, does this thought have any basis in the real world? So if you start to think of, what is the worst possible outcome of this scenario? Like this talk, what's the worst possible outcome of this talk? I don't know, people boo and throw tomatoes? Maybe, but if I think about it, that's never happened to me before, so I have no concrete evidence that my worst case scenario will happen. And it's probably pretty unlikely, so maybe this isn't actually something that I have to worry about. So trying to find concrete evidence for the worst case scenario and then realizing that it's very difficult to find that concrete evidence will help you realize that, okay, I had this thought, but it's just a thought. Clearly, it doesn't have any basis in reality, so I can just let that thought go. So that's what refute your thinking is all about. Trying to critically analyze those thoughts that we're having. And then pair thinking. I really love this one too. This speaks to the idea of the plasticity in our brains again. So you guys have probably heard of the idea that cells that fire together wire together. That just means that the things you think the most are the pathways that solidify the most in your brain. And if those pathways are the strongest in your brain, that means that those are the things that are going to be easiest for you to activate. So if we constantly have these stressful thoughts, we're forming a lot of those pathways in our brains. We're literally forming connections between neurons that lead to these stressful thoughts. But because of the plasticity in our brains, we can change those connections. If you start to use the technique of paired thinking and say that every time I have a negative stressful thought about something, I'm going to immediately pair it with 2 positive thoughts that are in that same domain. So if I have a stressful thought about giving this talk today, if I think, I don't know how this talk is going to go, maybe it won't be that great, I could pair that with 2 positive things related to public speaking. I can think, the students must have thought that it'd be okay. They nominated me for this in the first place. And every other time I've talked to a large audience, nobody died, things were okay, they generally seem to like it. So you pair those 2 positive thoughts that are related to your negative thought to give yourself that evidence that this negative thought isn't really true. And the more you do this, the more you immediately try to pair a negative with 2 positives, the more you start to form new neural connections in your brain that will help make positive thoughts more automatic for you. The more you use these pathways, the stronger they will get, the easier it will be to start thinking about positive versions of the outcome instead of negative versions. So we can change our brains, change our thoughts, change our minds, change our lives. Whoop, okay. Ah. Okay, also, humor and laughter. This one is wonderful for thoughts, trying to take your thoughts and turning them into something humorous, or even just watching funny things. Laughter releases endorphins. Endorphins make us feel good. Putting on your favorite comedy or something like that, just getting yourself out of your current stressful thought, giving yourself a little bit of humor and laughter, hanging out with a friend you find funny, those things can all help relieve the stress that we're feeling. And then refute negative labels. So often, we'll try to give ourselves labels. So for a lot of people, let's use the idea of procrastination, right? So a lot of us tend to procrastinate on things, and if we do that, we'll often give ourselves the label that we're lazy. We procrastinate because we're lazy. So when we give ourselves that label, then we start to suffer from confirmation bias. This is the idea that the label you give yourself then sort of predisposes you to find a bunch of evidence that supports that label and ignore evidence that disputes it. So if you've given yourself the label of lazy, it's really easy for you to think about all kinds of other times when you thought that you were lazy, and then you start to think, I'm lazy all the time, and then you get down on yourself, then you get stressed, then you think this is something I can never change. But that's not true. There are tons of times where you weren't lazy. So we have to effortfully try to think of those things to counteract the negative label that our thoughts are trying to give us. Avoid trying to give yourself those labels like I'm not good at this, or I'm not smart, or I'm not confident, or I can't do this. Those are labels that we don't have to believe from our thoughts. So try to refute those negative labels by remembering times where you didn't behave in that way, you behaved in the opposite way. Okay? So those are all techniques to use to try to combat your stressful thoughts. So now let's talk about feelings. Okay, we'll go with that. So feelings kind of divided into relationship-focused ways to cope and individual-focused ways to cope. So relationship-focused ways are all about social support. So just recognizing that you're not alone in this stressor. This is something someone else would find stressful too. I did this again with the last lecture. I asked a friend of mine who had also received nominations. I was like, how would you feel about giving the last lecture? And she said the same thing. I would feel like, why did the students nominate me and what do I have to say? So I was like, okay, this reaction was normal. It wasn't something just specific to me. Someone else would feel these things too. So we recognize that we're not alone with some of those feelings that we have. They're normal. Also, social support allows you to do brainstorm coping. This means you can get together with somebody and come up with ways to deal with your stressor. Now, often when people get together for social support, they kind of just do a lot of venting and complaining about the stressor. And a little bit of that is good. Sometimes you just need to get those emotions out first before you can actually get down to the business of trying to deal with your stressor. But this is what the 80-20 rule is all about. If you're getting together with someone to kind of work through a stressor, great. Vent about it for 20% of the time that you're together. Get that out, get the emotions out, get all the sort of racing feelings about that thing out off your chest, and then use the 80% of the time that you have left to try to come up with constructive ways to actually deal with the stressor instead of just complaining about it. Talking through those things with someone else can give you ideas you may not have thought of yourself. And then, of course, hugs. Hugs and physical contact, even something like a warm pat on the back. Tons of research has shown that this sort of warm physical contact releases oxytocin in our body, often called the love or the cuddle hormone. And oxytocin is actually useful for dampening your stress response. It actually starts to decrease some of the hormones of your stress response. So a lot of research has shown that people that get more frequent hugs from people have higher levels of oxytocin at baseline, and then those people are better able to deal with stressors that come up. So try and incorporate more warm, positive physical contact into your life with people that you feel safe with is a great way to sort of buffer yourself against stressors that might come up in the future. Okay, so individual focus. I love this one, facial feedback. So that's what this image is all about. The things you do with your face actually tell useful things to your brain. So this is an old trick in psychology, is that if you put a pencil in your teeth, as we see on your left over here, it activates the same muscles in your face as you activate when you smile, and that actually tells your brain, hey, this face is smiling. Your brain is used to interpreting those particular muscles moving as, oh, I'm happy now. Otherwise, why would I be smiling like a big goof? So it actually starts to make it easier for positive thoughts to come to you and for you to actually start to feel a little happier. So even just artificially putting a smile on your face can actually change the hormones that are floating around your body and can make you feel differently. Something as simple as just changing the expression on your face. And then language. Be careful about the language you use to talk to yourself. Often, we use really harsh language to talk to ourselves. We use language that we would never use if we were talking to one of our friends, right? But why is that? Why don't we talk to ourselves in the loving way that we talk to our friends? So try to remember to be kind to yourself with your language, and also to use language that isn't sort of doom and gloom, So instead of saying something like, ooh, I doubt this thing will work out, or I'm afraid this thing won't happen right, you would say, I hope this thing works out. Or, I think this thing could be okay. Or, try not to use language that has sort of these negative ideas to it, like, I always tell this one to my husband too. When he says the Oilers will never win the cup again. And then I say, well, don't say never, just say they haven't won it again yet. So you give it a much more positive spin as opposed to this doom and gloom never. You're like, okay, I'm gonna give them the out that this could happen eventually. Okay, so try to look at the language you're using. And then journaling. Journaling is really great for recognizing patterns about your own stressors. So recognizing what stresses you out, ways you tried to deal with it in the past, and whether those things worked or not. It's a great way to gather data on yourself. Also, journaling about a stressor and trying to make some sense about that event with words like because or I realize. A lot of research has shown that that sort of expressive writing actually helps people cope better with their stressors, and then those stressors seem less stressful for them. It's also been shown to free up working memory space. So some evidence has shown that students that write about test anxiety before they take a test, if they get all those things out of their mind and put it on paper, that actually frees up working memory space so you can perform better on the test that you're actually working on. So sometimes just getting it out of your head and onto paper gets it out of your brain, gives your body a chance to relax, recognize this isn't a threat. And then also, another one of my favorites is the idea of gratitude. So some people will keep a gratitude journal, but often we get so caught up in thinking about or complaining about the things we don't have or things that aren't going right that we often forget to take a minute to acknowledge and think about the things that we do have that are going great. You know, you have enough food, water, shelter, opportunity to get an education in a safe and supportive environment. So we have all kinds of things that are going right in our lives all the time. And again, a ton of research has shown that just taking some time to think about those things, either at the beginning of the day or the end, really helps people cope with their stress because it helps to keep things in perspective. So here are, also this idea of engage with stress differently. So this is another one that I love. I use this one all the time. That is the idea of thinking about your stress response as helping you rise to the challenge. It's mobilizing this energy to help you deal with whatever you're dealing with right now, and then you're gonna rock it, and then your stress response is gonna go back down. So I use this one all the time. I was using it right before I came out here today. It's like, okay, my adrenaline's going, my heart rate's going, but that's mobilizing my energy to hopefully make this talk lively for the next hour, hour and a half. So viewing your stress response as helpful to you rather than harmful can be a really powerful way to remove some of the threat that we feel and break that chain of events between your mind and your body. Interpreting those signals from your body as not threatening can help avoid getting to that place of panic. Okay, behaviors. So this is the third one in our list of 4 things. Sometimes we just need to have some things that we do that are just for fun. So hobbies, something that you do just because you like it, not because it pads your CV, not because it's great for the world, unless you just like doing that kind of stuff, but just because you like to do it. So for me, I'm in a bowling league. So I bowl every Tuesday. We actually just had our very last week of playoffs yesterday. And this is a chance for me to get together with some people that have nothing to do with my work, nothing to do with school. It's a great way to just relax and not think about all the other stuff, and even sometimes get a different perspective on things. So just doing something that you do just because you enjoy it. And it's also a great way to sort of regulate your social contact. So if you have maybe a job that requires you to be really social, picking up a hobby that allows you to reconnect with yourself can be really great. So maybe something like art or nature walking or building or construction or something like that. Something that you can do on your own time to reconnect with yourself. Or if you have a job where you're alone a lot, having a hobby where you get to interact with other people can help get you that social contact and social support that is so great for coping with stress. Also, art therapy. So this is my attempt at art therapy. I went to a paint night. Paint nights can be really great for helping sort of alleviate some stress. Art therapy has been shown to be really useful for helping people stop thinking about their stressor and just focus on what they're creating with their art. Even things as simple as coloring a mandala. That has been shown in empirical studies to help reduce people's stress response. So all those adult coloring books, they've been shown to actually work. Okay? And then pet therapy. We all love when the dogs come to campus, right? Dogs and really any sort of animal give us this non-judgmental, unconditional love, and It's been shown that just the act of petting a dog actually releases oxytocin in your own body, and it also releases oxytocin in the dog's body. So it's good for everybody. So finding a pet, if you don't have your own pet, volunteering at an animal shelter or just going in to sort of interact with the animals, it's gonna be really great for you as well as really great for those animals. So those are a couple easy behavioral ways to sort of help us deal with our stress. And then another big one for behaviors, the idea of time management. So this is what often tends to get away from us, especially if you're a student towards the end of the semester. Maybe you left a lot of your reading or a lot of your studying till the end. Now exams are coming, you're sort of like, ooh, wish I could rewind to January and get better time management. So this is a skill. Oftentimes people will say, I'm just not good at time management. It's something that you improve on with time. Okay? It's just like any other skill. It's not something you're born being good or bad at, it's something you have to practice. And this one, I'm notoriously bad for not doing this, for not scheduling space. Sometimes you have to protect your own time. So I would schedule meetings back to back to back to back to back all day long. And then the first one goes a little long, and then you're running late for the next one, then that one goes long, then you're late for the next one, and it just ends up with a snowball of stress. So just scheduling some space between commitments can give you that buffer time that you need if something doesn't go quite right, or even just gives you a chance to breathe between some of those commitments. So being intentional about scheduling space can be really useful for alleviating some stress that piles up during the day. And then prioritize. We can't do everything. There's not enough time in a day or a life to do everything we want to do. So we have to prioritize the things we feel most passionate about. Devote your time and energy to those things that you love the most, and be okay with letting some of the rest of it go. We don't have to do everything. We don't have to be everything to everybody. Sometimes we gotta say no to save our own lives and our own sanities, and that is okay. It's okay to protect some of your own time. Okay. And of course, the dreaded procrastination. So this, of course, clearly goes along with time management. This is something that I talk about with my students all the time. Again, getting a handle on your procrastination is something that comes with practice too, but this can easily lead to that negative label we might give ourselves of saying that we're lazy. But there is actually a lot more that goes into why people procrastinate than just they don't want to work on the task. That is some of it sometimes. Sometimes it's just something you don't want to do, and so you put it off. Or you put it off and say, I'll be more motivated to do this at the end of the weekend. That's not motivation, that's panic, because now you have to get this thing done. Motivation isn't just gonna fall on you out of thin air. It's not just going to appear. But what does help motivation is just action. Action often leads to motivation, which then leads to more action. So this is what I often tell my students, is just tolerate those initial negative feelings and then act. Just realize, okay, this doesn't feel that great right now, but I'm gonna open my computer and open this file anyway. And another trick that I use with myself is just what's called the 5-minute rule. Often the hardest part about doing a task is getting started, right? It just seems overwhelming to get started. So I make a deal with myself that I will only work on this task for 5 minutes. So I open my laptop, I open the file, I start working on the task, and then something interesting happens where behavioral inertia kind of kicks in. You're already working on it. It's not really as bad as you thought. So all of a sudden you've been working on it for 10 minutes. Like, okay, I could keep going. All of a sudden you've been working on it for half an hour. So you just made a deal to start to work on it for 5 minutes, and that often snowballs into, this task isn't as bad as I thought. You just have to get over the initial fear of starting, and then you're able to keep going. So this is where I just want to touch on the idea, again, that procrastination is more than just avoiding a task. So often what will happen is that we tie up our self-worth so much in a task, and then we're afraid that we won't do it well. And if we get afraid that we won't do it well, all of a sudden demand seems to outweigh coping, and then we start to get stressed. So then we're stressed about it, so we don't want to start it in the first place. So often people aren't procrastinating because they're lazy or they just don't want to do something, so they have all of these other emotions tied up in the task. If that task reflects your self-worth, the worth that you feel you have as a person, and you feel like maybe you're not going to do that well in this task, that creates a ton of stress. So it prevents people from even starting on the task because they're afraid of what the outcome of that task will be. So a lot of fear of failure and self-worth being tied up with tasks leads to procrastination. So recognizing your reasons why you procrastinate in the first place can be the first step to helping you overcome those things. And I always tell this to my students too. If you are just starting on your journey to procrastinating less, it's okay if you sort of fall off the bandwagon. If you made this great schedule and then you weren't quite able to stick to it, don't give yourself that negative label that you're a bad person because you didn't stick to your plan. It's just like a kid learning to ride a bike. If they fall off the bike, you're not going to say the kid's a bad person. They just need more practice with the skill of riding the bike. So if you fall off your procrastination plan and you didn't quite do what you said you were going to do, it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't affect your worth as a person. You just need more practice at this skill. You just got to get back on the bike and try again. So procrastination can be overcome with time and with practice. I should know, I was a notorious procrastinator. I tell my students this too. I once started studying for an 8:30 a.m. exam at 10 p.m. the night before. I waited till the last minute. So if I could get a handle on procrastination, seriously, anybody can get a handle on it. Okay, this is true, I know. Okay, so our last one, physiology. Maybe you feel really impacted physically by your stress. So what are some things you can do here? Well, the first one is this really simple relaxation technique. Jessie, who gave me the intro today, actually presented on this technique when she was in my stress class. And this is progressive muscle relaxation. So if you haven't heard of this, this is a very simple technique where you just tense an isolated muscle in your body, and you tense it up for maybe 15 seconds, and then you release it. And it's amazing how much tension we hold in our bodies because of stress. And intentionally tensing and then releasing that tension can release actually a ton of those physical feelings of stress. So it's really great to do something like this and to focus on your body. So don't have those worrying thoughts about your stressor, but actually really think, okay, I'm tensing my toes right now. Okay, I'm releasing my toes right now, and focus on what those feelings feel like to keep yourself in the present and focused on releasing that bodily tension. And this is really great to do right before you fall asleep, because it actually really helps relieve bodily tension before you go to sleep, and it's been shown to help people sleep more soundly, and I believe to stay asleep for longer. So it's a great simple technique to try. You want to tense individual muscle groups at a time, so you tense your calves, and then you tense your thighs, and you tense your arms, even individual muscle groups on your face. We hold a lot of tension in our face and our shoulders. This can help you release some of that tension. And then exercise. This is always a great one, because your body is mobilizing all of this energy, and then that makes you feel all antsy and jittery. So if you exercise, you get to use up all of that mobilized energy, so you're sort of removing this signal for stress in your body, and your body says, okay, I don't have all this extra mobilized energy anymore, maybe this dangerous threat is no longer present. So and exercise doesn't have to be going to the gym. It could be putting on your favorite song and dancing in your room. It could be taking a walk in nature, anything to sort of get your body moving to use up the energy your stress response has mobilized. Deep breathing. This one is also great. So when I ask my students at the end of my stress class the techniques they find the most useful, it's always a pretty close tie between thinking about your stress response differently, like we talked about, and then deep breathing. It's something that we hear all the time, but if you don't really know why it works, I used to do this too. People would be like, oh, just take a deep breath. I'd be like, seriously, you can't tell me something more useful? Okay, I already know how to breathe, this isn't working. But when you know why it works, then you can harness the power of your thoughts for your purposes as opposed to stress purposes. So deep breathing works because every time we inhale, we actually slightly activate our sympathetic fight or flight system. And then every time we exhale, we actually slightly activate our rest and digest parasympathetic system. Because when you exhale, it activates this nerve called your vagus nerve. And this nerve helps slow down things like your heart rate and your cardiovascular system. So I always tell my students, take a few minutes, like if you get stressed on an exam or something, this is really great for acute in-the-moment stressors. Take a minute, take a deep breath in, and then really concentrate on that exhale. Hold that exhale for a long time, and you're actually activating that parasympathetic system. And when you activate your rest and digest system, your fight and flight one can't turn on. So it is helping your body to calm down, and it really works. Like I said, I didn't really believe it before I knew how it worked. But a couple of months ago, I had another one of those 12-hour interviews, and the night before, I was laying in bed, and I was looking at my Fitbit, and my heart rate when I was laying in bed was almost 100. I know, right? That is bad. So normally when I'm like sitting doing nothing, it's like 55. So clearly I was pretty stressed out about this thing. So I was like, I'm gonna try deep breathing. So I started doing those long exhales, just laying in my bed, and I was watching my Fitbit, and I could see my heart rate going down. I was able to get it down to about 70 just by doing this deep breathing. And that concrete evidence really showed me that this technique is very powerful. If you believe that it works and you know how it works, it is more effective for you. Okay, so tried and true, great technique. And then the last one. This one I've become somewhat obsessed about lately. Like I told you guys, I love to learn about new things, so I've been reading a ton about nutrition and the gut lately, and it's fascinating. But it's also a little bit scary because the food that we have these days is not the same as the food we used to have. The soil is different, things are produced differently, the soil doesn't have the same amount of nutrients that it used to. So even if you have a really nutritious diet now, you're probably still not getting the same nutrients that even your parents would have got if they ate the same diet, just because of the way things are produced and the way the soil is these days. So most of us are actually lacking in a lot of important nutrients. And this can have a huge impact on your stress response because a lot of the processes that happen in our body actually metabolically and physiologically to do things like produce hormones depend on having adequate nutrition. So like I say here, try to focus on those whole foods. I mean, it's advice we've heard all the time, but this stuff actually really impacts your stress response. So by a whole food, I just mean like things around the outside of the supermarket that don't have a sticker on them to tell you what's in it, because you don't need a sticker on an apple to say the ingredients in there are an apple, right? So try to buy those foods that are whole foods that don't have a list of random ingredients. Those are going to give you some of the nutrition that most of us are sorely lacking. Then the gut microbiome. This one is fascinating, guys. So there's all kinds of research now that shows there's this bidirectional communication between our brains and our guts, and we have something like 5 pounds of microbes living in our guts. Our brains are only about 3 pounds. So I know, right? Like those gut microbes are outweighing our brains. And the other thing they have in common with our brains are that those gut microbes actually produce a lot of really important neurotransmitters. Like the microbes in our gut, I've read produce about 80% of the serotonin in our bodies. We often think that's produced in our brain, but a lot of it comes from our gut. So if you have what's called dysbiosis in the gut, that means you have more bad bacteria, this is usually stuff like fungus, and less good bacteria that can actually process the food we're eating and then go through the metabolic processes of making things like serotonin. So if you have too much bad bacteria, that's going to crowd out the good bacteria, and you're not able to produce those feel-good neurotransmitters. So you really have to focus on making sure that you're feeding the good bacteria and not feeding the bad ones. Unfortunately, the best way to do this is to not eat as much sugar and, yes, eat some more fiber. So, not the sexiest advice to deal with stress, but important and very practical nonetheless. So often we don't think about our nutrition and our stress other than like the lifestyle changes that happen when we are stressed and we go for all the carbs and the sugar, but trying to incorporate a few more nutritious things can actually really help balance out your stress response. And I always tell people, don't focus on eliminating stuff first. Focus on just adding more of the good stuff. Because if you focus on trying to eliminate all sugar as well as only buy whole foods, then you're going to get overwhelmed and you're going to fall off the wagon, right? So just focus on, okay, I'm going to add one more vegetable to my day this week. Next week, I'll add even more vegetables to my day. Won't focus on cutting out sugar yet, but you'll find that the more of the good stuff you add, the less you crave the other stuff. Okay? And that's literally because your good bugs are starting to outweigh your bad bugs. And then this last one. This has been actually the most recent addition to my own sort of supplement regimen, is magnesium. This is like my new favorite thing to talk about. So it turns out that the majority of people are very deficient in magnesium. And this is important because magnesium is involved in hundreds of enzymatic reactions in our body all the time. And a lot of those things are, again, important for producing things like feel-good neurotransmitters, like serotonin. So if we're deficient in magnesium, it's almost impossible to get the amount we need from our diet, for reasons I talked about, the soil, how food's produced, all that stuff. So if we're not getting enough, we're not producing these feel-good neurotransmitters, this contributes to things like depression. Depression is hugely linked to stress. Also, magnesium is really important for the process of producing ATP. You probably remember from like high school biology that ATP is your body's energy. Magnesium is needed in something like 6 out of the 8 steps that are used to produce ATP. So if you're deficient in magnesium, that actually contributes to feelings of fatigue. So if you're taking magnesium, I take a magnesium supplement because who doesn't want to feel more energy and less stressed by something as simple as adding this additional nutrient that our bodies need and aren't getting enough of. Also, I have this image here to show that, so this guy right here is a magnesium molecule, and it's really important for blocking certain receptors in your neurons. And if those receptors aren't blocked, that can actually contribute to a lot of the racing thoughts that we experience when we're stressed, because those postsynaptic neurons are firing way more than they're supposed to because they don't have this little magnesium blocking them. But if you have adequate magnesium, that actually really helps reduce things like stressful racing thoughts. So those are some of the practical, physiologically related ideas that I've been looking into lately. Okay, so we've kind of gone through the meat and potatoes of this talk. Hopefully you guys picked up 1 or 2 things that you might want to incorporate into your own lives. But really, just find what works for you. You might think, magnesium, whatever, I'm not into that. Fine, you don't have to do it, but find what does work for you. Maybe you think exercise will be really great for you, or some of the techniques to combat thoughts would be really great for you. Use the techniques that work for you. But also recognize that new techniques do take sometimes a few weeks to really start being effective. We're trying to build good stress coping habits here, and habits often take a few weeks to form. So sometimes someone will try a technique out once and say, ooh, it didn't really work for me this time, I'm not gonna do it anymore. You gotta give it a little bit of time so that that technique really starts to work. So this is why I have here, stress management isn't a diet. You don't just wanna do it when you're feeling really stressed. It's a lifestyle. You wanna have good stress management all the time so you never get to the point where you're almost on the verge of panic because you're able to deal with things before they get there. So don't kind of just look at it as a diet, look at it as a lifestyle change. Often people will ask me things like, Michelle, tell me how to get rid of my stress. And I'm like, I'm not, Dumbledore or Gandalf. I can't just wave a magic wand and say, like, be gone, stress. But what I can tell you are things to incorporate into your lives, but they're not just gonna make your stress disappear overnight. So recognizing that that's the way it works and that it's fine if something's taking a little while to work, that is how stress coping works. Okay? So one of the big things about stress coping is having the belief that you can deal with the demands life throws at you. So the more stress coping tools you incorporate into your toolbox, the more confident you'll be that you can handle those demands of life, and then the threat response won't start being activated, right? So keep calm, remember that you got this, you have a lot of coping resources, and you can always work on improving those things. So what I do to remind myself about my coping resources is I have this little guy right here. This is a cortisol molecule. That's one of our big stress hormones. I'm wearing it right now. So I wear this necklace. I asked for this. This was the only thing I asked for my birthday a couple years ago. Very hard to find. Apparently, people don't want to wear stress as jewelry. So it took a while to track one down. But I like to wear it because it reminds me that I can conceptualize my stress response in such a way that I believe that it's helping me to overcome whatever challenge I'm facing, and that, I got this. I got this so much that I can wear stress as jewelry. So that helps me remember that I can cope with whatever life is throwing at me, and stress isn't mastering me, but I'm rather mastering my stress. So all this kind of leads me to one of my last sort of life lessons that I have kind of gathered from my somewhat brief time on this planet, and that is the idea that we all have something valuable to share. Remember, I thought, what the heck am I going to say? And now I've been going on for like over an hour. So we all have something to say. And we can see all kinds of examples of this happening today in the world. from huge things where people are sharing their stories, like the March for Life, young people sharing their stories to try to get more sensible gun regulations, women sharing their stories with the Me Too movement to try to get protection from some of this harassment that's been happening for a long time. And it can be as simple as me talking to you guys today, trying to share a couple of techniques that maybe you can incorporate into your life to help you cope with your stress. So we all have something valuable to say. And when I was young, I never dreamed of getting up in front of large audiences and trying to tell them some useful things for their lives. Clearly, we've established that would have scared the bejesus out of me when I was young, so I never imagined doing this kind of thing. But what I always did like was helping people one-on-one, trying to make some sort of positive impact on one person's life in that moment. But what I've learned is that if you make a positive impact on one person, then that person often goes and makes a positive impact on somebody else. And then the impact that you started with one person becomes 2, and then 2 becomes 4, and then 4 becomes a lot more. And all of a sudden, you have this rippling effect where this little, what you thought was a small positive effect has now impacted all kinds of people. I just wanted to teach a class about stress to help deal with my own stress. And now here I am talking to all you fine people, the internet, helping people to hopefully incorporate things into their lives to help them manage their stress. I never thought that I would be doing this because I didn't think I had something valuable to say. But it turns out that we all have something valuable to say. And even if we think it's something small, that small thing could be just what somebody else needs to hear or what somebody else needs to learn. So never think that what you have to say is too small or not worth sharing. We all have something valuable to say, and we all have something valuable to share. Okay? So that's the whole idea of rippling. Rippling these positive things that we have into other people, they'll ripple it into others, and then the effect becomes way larger than you could ever imagine. Okay? So, I'm getting to the end here, and upon reflecting on this talk and thinking about life lessons, I was going to only really have 3, but then I came up with a couple of bonus ones at the end, which is ironic, because I thought I had nothing to say, right? So, giving away all my stuff here, all right. Lesson number 4, you gotta try to have fun, right? So this is me throwing my head back, laughing hysterically at my husband as he was saying his vows during our wedding. So probably normally people don't laugh hysterically during their vows, but our whole wedding philosophy was that we just really wanted to have a great time. We wanted everyone else to have a great time too, and everything else was secondary. So this is what I always try to remember whenever I'm going into something stressful. And my husband's great at helping me remember this. He always says whenever I'm about to do something stressful, he's like, all right, Michelle, you always come home from these things and you say, it was actually kind of fun. So when I did my PhD dissertation defense, I came home and said, it was actually kind of fun. 12-hour interview. Came home and said, that was actually kind of fun. This talk that I got all stressed out about today, actually been kind of fun. So have fun, because otherwise, really, what's the point? Everything is exponentially more awesome when you are having fun doing it, and that fun can be infectious for other people. So this is a philosophy I try to bring into all of my classes. I try to have fun every day in class. I try to not take myself too seriously in class. And that's kind of summed up by this comment that I got on a final exam last spring from one of my students. So at the end of the exam, it says, you made it to the end. Have a great summer. And this student wrote, you too. I have no idea how you're so perky all the time, even when the class is, kind of as responsive as if we weren't there. But it is inspiring. So people recognize when you're having fun. Even if they don't sort of reflect that fun back to you at the time, they might think about it later and think, it was inspiring that that person was having fun doing what they're doing. I want to have fun doing what I'm doing too. Okay? So I truly love what I do. Try to infuse this sense of fun into everything. It just makes everything much better. And then my last bonus life lesson, number 5. We are all works in progress. So again, goes to the idea we're all teachers, we're all learners, we're all learning all the time. So we are all constantly working on our skill set, and stress management is a skill set. It's not something that you're going to have it complete at some point. You're going to be working on it your whole life, adding new coping strategies to your arsenal all the time, because some strategies are going to be useful for some things in some periods of your life, and then other strategies will be useful for other things at other periods of your life. So we're all kind of this work in progress. And really, like there's no prize at the end of life, right? So it's all about the journey. It's not about the destination. So try to remember to have some fun and take some joy in the journey, because that's what it's all about anyway. Okay? So we are all works in progress. And I'd also like to say that if anybody out there is sort of panicking because maybe you don't have your whole life plan figured out just yet, I didn't have my life plan figured out either. I still don't have my life plan really figured out. I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing right now, but I just said yes to opportunities that came up. So try some new things. Say yes to some opportunities. You never know exactly where you're going to find the passion that sparks you and then sort of takes you on this journey of life. So now I'd like to sort of end by saying that being nominated as the last lecturer today was actually very, very poignant for me, because this is going to be one of the last times that I address a large audience at the U of A, because that interview that I was at when I found out that I was the last lecturer was actually successful. So I will be starting the next step on my own life journey come September. So I've accepted a position as an assistant professor over at McEwen, which is great, because then that means I can still come back to all the cool stuff that's happening here, as well as bring some cool stuff over there. So I want to say it has been a true, true honor to be a part of this U of A community for the last 11 years. I came here in 2006, so I guess going on 12 years now. I have had the chance to meet and work with some amazing people here. I've had the chance to meet and teach some awesome students. I had the chance to find my own passion for teaching, which I never thought I would have, and learning about stress. And I also met my wonderful husband here. So I figure that's not a bad takeaway from my grad school alma mater. So I would really like to say, truly and deeply from the bottom of my heart, thank you to the U of A community for opening your arms, allowing me, welcoming me onto this campus and into your lives. And I truly, truly will always have a special place in my heart for the U of A. The outpouring of love and support that I've received from this place has been really, really amazing. So with that, I would like to say thank you to everybody that came here today, everybody that watches this on the internet. Thank you for sharing your time with me. Hopefully you learned something useful to incorporate into your own lives, and I'm very honored to have been chosen as your last lecturer, and I'm so glad that I didn't let my own stress get in my own way, and I hope that you guys don't let yours get in your way either. So thank you for being here tonight. I really appreciate your time. Oh, thank you. That was awesome. I like that a lot.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Wow, that was incredible, wasn't it? Let's hear it one more time for Dr. Moscicki.
Thank you very much.
So on behalf of the Alumni Association, I just really want to thank you for your great presentation tonight, and a small token of our appreciation. Thanks for being here.
I love it. Thank you very much.
All right. And congratulations on your new role.
Thank you.
My name is Sean Price. I'm Associate Vice President of Alumni Relations here at the university. And I think tonight's presentation is just a great reminder of all the incredible work that's being done by our faculty here, outstanding teachers and researchers, and it is a great community to be part of, isn't it? If tonight's event has inspired you to stay even more connected to the university, please let us know tonight. There are so many different ways that you can volunteer here at the university through the Alumni Association. You can talk to any of our staff here tonight, or just visit the Alumni Association website. Click on the volunteer tab, and you'll see all the different opportunities. And if you're a U of A student here tonight, Samira mentioned earlier that she's a member of the Alumni Student Council. So if you'd like to learn more, you can see my colleagues, Dustin or Megan. I'm not sure if they're in the crowd here. Up top, there you go. Or Samira or myself, and we'd love to share the opportunity with you to volunteer on our Alumni Student Council in the future. We have some refreshments in the lobby, so stick around. Please join us for the rest of the evening. If you're a student, good luck on your finals. I know they're getting close. Thanks for being here again. Thanks, Dr. Moscicki. Thank you very much.
you.